Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm reviewing the newest X-Men movie, The Wolverine. And overall, I was really pleasantly surprised by this movie. I'd been thinking going into it that it was probably going to be at least okay. I mean, let's face it, it was really be hard for it to be worse than X-Men Origins Wolverine or X3, which both stunk on ice. And while this movie's not without its flaws, overall, it's pretty good. I had a lot of fun watching it. The friend that I went to see the movie with, also a big X-Men fan, he really enjoyed it. And it just really brought back to me the good side of the X-Men movies. Especially the, before they what was going on with the X-Men movies before they did X-Men First Class, I suppose would be the most accurate way to put it. Now, the story is fairly loosely based on a famous storyline written by Frank Miller about Wolverine in Japan. And as I said, it's really very loosely based on that. I remember the basics of this story. And as I said, they do make a lot of changes there. The whole Wolverine using, accepting Bushido as a way of helping to channel his inner rage, and as a way to, a path for him to follow, the way of the warrior. That was kind of a big element of the story in the comics, and of course, the way things played out there with Martico and all things and whatnot all played out really, really differently. But still, it's very much still a good Wolverine story. And it's even been said by the director that this was really more of a kind of a film noir story rather than sort of the superhero action that we are traditionally see in the X-Men movies and comics. And it works. I mean, it's basically turn Wolverine loose in Japan, make it so that his healing factor is failing him, kind of bringing him down to a point where he's much more vulnerable, and then basically throw Wolverine against some extremely competent Yakuza guys. That's one thing I gotta say is it really is pretty amazing just how tenacious those Yakuza dudes were. Like during the fight with on the bullet train, that was. Well, it's like I said to my buddy when we were watching after the movie. It's like that was a cartoon, and it really did get to the point where it really was pretty ridiculous. But it was also pretty darn cool. And just watching Wolverine fall into his berserker rages a few times and turn those adamantium claws loose on the Yakuza, yeah, man, that's cool. That's what you do to make a good Wolverine story. And my friend who I went to saw this, he's also into really fitness. He was just absolutely blown away by just how cut Hugh Jackman was, and I always have to say, it's impressive. He really, really worked on his physique for this movie, and yeah, Wolverine looks like a guy that if he was pissed at you, it's time to run the other direction fast as you can. But anyway, getting back to what I was saying about how during the story they kind of brought Wolverine back down to a more normal level. His healing factor is failing him, and of course this is a really good move in terms of storytelling. It certainly presents Wolverine with a serious challenge, and of course it brings up to the whole crux of the movie is that Wolverine kind of has this whole death wish sort of thing. He is feeling this intense guilt and self-loathing after the events of X3, where he was forced to kill Jean. And I like how, we're never for a minute supposed to think that this is really Jean he's seeing in his dreams. It's in my mind kind of what's referred to in Jungian psychology as the shadow, the sort of the part of ourselves that we try not to think about. But Wolverine being Wolverine, he doesn't really hide from that aspect so much as he just simply allows it to torment him, like some sort of bizarre penance for what's happened with him having to kill Jean. So when the opportunity comes along that he might really be able to become a normal guy, live a normal life, die like a normal man, it's really no wonder that he's at the very least intrigued by all of this. And of course, we get to see his relationship with Mariko, which, it plays out really about as well as it could under these type of circumstances. Now, I certainly did like that Mariko was shown that, this is a lady who can, to a reasonable degree, take care of herself, even physically. But she's just simply up against people, mostly like Yakuza thugs, who are just way out of her league. But she doesn't really take any BS from Wolverine. She presents herself as a strong character, and overall, I think she's well executed. Yukio is, I think they maybe made her just a little too over the top. She's basically a psychic mutant, badass with a sword. But on the other hand, the long-standing member of the X-Men, Psylocke, is basically a psychic ninja. So, okay, I suppose maybe that's certainly not really a huge stretch for what we see in the X-Men comics. In terms of other characters, I don't really have a whole lot to say about anybody else in the movie. Like Harada, I think was the sort of the childhood friend guy's name. Mariko's dad was, fairly one-dimensional, as was her fiance. By the way, speaking as somebody who's lived in Japan for about 3 years, I have to say it's a little weird to see just like this many people in Japan who randomly happen to speak perfectly fluent English. Now, granted, with the exception of the Yakuza guy that Wolverine interrogates in Nagasaki, these are basically the people you're dealing with are kind of Japanese one percenters, the real elite of society. Yukio not coming from that background, but having been raised around these people. So it's really not that unreasonable that they would speak English, but still, it's on the other hand, it's one of those things. It's just like like when you see Wolverine dealing with the lady at the hotel who keeps saying over and over and again in Japanese, like, I don't speak English. If you had to do too much of that, then it would really just absolutely kill the pacing of the movie. So I'm willing to let them slide on that. And from having lived in Japan, I live in South Korea right now. You gotta understand. So when I'm watching this movie, they're showing with Korean subtitles, which includes what they're saying in Japanese. Now, I studied Japanese in college. I lived there for about 3 years, but I left Japan like 6 years ago and haven't really done much with my Japanese since then. So it's pretty safe to say that I've gotten kind of rusty. So I was trying to listen to this and pick up what people were saying, and provide a little quick translations for my friend who doesn't speak the language at all. And for the most part, I was able to get the gist of what people were saying, but there were some times when it's just like, oh, damn it, just slow down, I can't understand what you're saying. But that's not really a flaw with the movie. That's just an experience that was unique to me. But still, it certainly made the movie memorable in a way, in my mind, that way. Let's see. What else do we have to say? Honestly, overall, as I said, this movie is pretty darn good. The characters. Oh yeah, Silver Samurai. Sorry, I almost forgot to talk about Silver Samurai. Now, I know there are going to be some people who are ultimately really upset with what they did with Silver Samurai. Who his identity. I won't spoil that for people who haven't. This is basically going to be a spoiler-free review, I guess I should say. So the identity of Silver Samurai and what they do with him. Although I will say that the more sci-fi take on him that we see at the end. Is actually, from what I understand, more in keeping with what they're doing with him recently in the comics. Now, the use of Viper as a character in this film probably might come to surprise a lot of people who, have maybe a basic understanding of the comics and completely baffle folks who probably don't really know. Long story short, Viper is a character from the Marvel comics. She's really more traditionally kind of a Nick Fury villain. Her dad is Baron von Strucker, head of Hydra, if I remember correctly. But she actually does have a history with Wolverine. There was a story several years ago, actually quite a few years ago, like somewhere around 2000, I think it was, written by Chris Claremont, a legendary X-Men writer, that basically Viper blackmails Wolverine into having to marry her for very bizarre and complicated reasons, but ones that ultimately do make sense in the context of the story. And it's, suffice to say, not a happy marriage. So, Viper, I would say, well, primarily a Nick Fury villain, I would say that it's reasonable to call her a Wolverine villain as well. Now, this obviously takes a pretty radically different take on Viper than how she is presented in the comics, with her being a mutant and all. But you know what? I'm okay with that. It's reinterpreting Viper so that she more closely fits as a Wolverine villain, and I don't really have a problem with that. Honestly, overall, I really don't have a problem with pretty much anything that they really changed. Just minor details that maybe I would have liked to have seen be a little bit more close to the comics, simply speaking, as a comic book fan. But at the end of the day, these things are ultimately really trivial. What we got here is, at the end of the day, what this movie needed to be. It's a good Wolverine story. It's a good X-Men movie. And oh man, do I want to see the next X-Men movie after that stinger at the end. Oh, I mean, really, that brief scene totally got me pumped to see the next X-Men movie, X-Men Days of Future Past. I'm really excited about that now. So all in all, folks, this is a really good movie. It's fun, it's exciting, and it really brings back what was good about the pre First Class X-Men movies. So with that said, folks, I'm going to call it here. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. So until next time, take care and have a good one.